I'm back, baby. What a gun to start it with than the Gen 2 WBP Jack rifle in 5.56. 5.56 AK, hadam. Hear me out. So for a long time, these guns didn't make a lot of financial sense. I mean, after all, 7.62 by 39 and the magazines associated with it for the AK were plentiful and extremely cheap. Hell, the rifles were cheap too. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when you could get a Warsaw for $3.99 out the door. Unfortunately, those days are long gone, and with the most recent sanctions coming out of the conflict in Ukraine, 7.62-39, steel-cased or otherwise, has become astronomically expensive, at least compared to what it used to be. So, of course, the market says, well, 5.56 is pretty steady, and if you're going to pay the same price for brass case 5.56 as steel case 7.62-39, you might as well get the brass case 5.56, right? Well, a lot of people thought the exact same thing, so these things gained a bit of popularity because, I mean, after all, back in the day, there were only really three options if you wanted a 5.56 AK. You could get an Arsenal, you could get a Baril, or you could get a Warsaw 3, and only the Warsaw 3 of that group was ever actually affordable, and all three guns kind of had reputations for reliability. I mean, the Baril was fine as long as you used the actual magazines designed for it, but the Warsaw was kind of considered rough, and the Arsenals, some of them had their retainer plate installed incorrectly, and consequently were pretty unreliable. Now, it's a fairly easy fix for a gunsmith familiar with it, but still, if you're buying an Arsenal, do you really want to pay more money before you even shoot it to make it reliable? No. So, the market was clamoring for a gun just like the Jack. The only problem is the first ones to come out had reports of pretty middling accuracy. The good news is on these Gen 2 models is now the barrels are made in-house by WBP, and allegedly all of those problems have been solved. But have they? Well, we're going to take a closer look at the Jack 5.56 rifle from WBP and find out. The Jack series of rifles from WBP are simply AKM-pattern semi-automatic carbines chambered in 7.62-39, 5.56, and 5.45. And as AKs, it should come as no surprise to you that they function via a long-stroke piston-driven action. You know, that thing that makes AK so goddamn reliable? Now, this has the upside of being obviously very robust and reliable, as I just said, but the downside is, well, they're heavy, and they can have a little more felt recoil than something like a short-stroke piston-driven action or a direct impingement rifle like an M4. Why, you may ask? Well, allow me to elucidate. It's because the piston is attached to the carrier group, which in turn means a giant mass is traversing the length of the receiver every time you pull the trigger. So because there's a large mass going back and forth between shots, there's going to be that force imparted on the shooter's shoulder, etc., etc. Now, these guns in particular feed from the same 5.56 AK mags as Bulgarian, Russian, and obviously Polish guns. And speaking of which, the new Jack ships with a single Polish-made polymer 30-round magazine in the box. Now, this magazine lacks any steel reinforcements, but in my testing has been thus far good to go. Now, if you want something a little more robust, like steel reinforcements in your AK magazines, there are several options available. Both affordable, like the ones from AC Unity, and extremely expensive, like those from Arsenal. And without going too far into it at this point, everything I tested in the gun, magazine-wise, worked flawlessly. But more on that later. So before we get too far in, let's start at the muzzle and work our way back to get the full rundown of the gun's features. Or as I like to say, much to my wife's chagrin, start at the spitter and go all the way to the 5.56 Jack ships with a 16.3-inch, 1/8 twist, 4150 black nitrated barrel threaded to standard AK 14x1 left-handed thread pitch. Yes, I totally memorized that and didn't read it. So if you have a favorite AK muzzle device, it will 100% fit on the Jack, regardless of what caliber the device is for. The Jack ships with a multi-prong birdcage flash hider that in testing does a fantastic job of suppressing the muzzle blast. And on a side note, I tried installing one of the JMac custom 4C 14L1, whatever the hell they call it, the slim compensators, and the gun actually recoiled downward. It was really surprising. I mean, just to give you an idea of just how little felt recoil this gun has. Now, just behind the muzzle device, the Jack ships with a standard AKM front sight tower, which is fully adjustable for windage and elevation with a tool. Further back, the gun also ships with a mil-spec bayonet lug in case your position gets overrun by PLA infantry. Adjacent to the bayonet lug, the Jack features the standard self-regulating gas system the AK is known for, along with a standard fluted gas tube with an integrated upper handguard retainer. Now, the rifle tested shipped with some very handsome blonde laminate wood furniture, but it's also available in some other finishes as well. Now, if none of these suit your fancy, well, great news, the Jack uses standard AKM furniture. So if you want to put on something like an RS Regulate railed handguard, or maybe one of the handguards from SLR Rifle Works or a JMac custom folding skeletonized stock, you can. Now, one unique feature about this gun over other 74-based guns is that it utilizes a 45-degree gas block instead of a 90-degree one. Now, I'm not exactly sure why WBP chose this, but I can assume it was for monetary reasons, but it could eventually lead to increased recoil as the gas port naturally opens up over time. But if you're worried that this means that one day the Jack will just suddenly start kicking like a mother, don't worry. The port takes thousands and thousands of rounds to open up, and even then, we're talking about something like a 5% increase in felt recoil. I mean, it's not going to blow your arm off. You're going to be like, oh, it moved like another 1/16 of an MOA. Big deal. Now, further back, the receiver of the Jack features an engraved Polish Eagle coat of arms and a standard rear sight notch adjustable for elevation with settings ranging from point blank, meaning like 25 to 50 meters, out to 800 meters. And normally this is where, in an AK review, I would say an optimistic 800 meters, but realistically, this gun's actually probably capable of it. I mean, probably not a headshot at 800 meters, but if you're shooting at a guy or a mortar team, yeah, absolutely. Continuing on, behind this, the Jack ships with a smooth dust cover, and below that, a standard AKM-N side rail. So if you want to mount something like an optic, like my Holosun HS503, or a more traditional Soviet POSP, you can easily do so. And in testing, every optic that I mounted on there worked perfectly. The rail seemed a tiny bit smaller than ones you'd find on true Russian AKs, but maybe by like a 15th of a millimeter, very little. More than what is within parameters of being able to tighten down a mount for it. Continuing on, the first fundamental difference between this rifle and a standard AKM is on the other side of the rifle. It ships with an extended safety selector, and it lets shooters use their index finger instead of your whole hand to toggle it. Now, normally I'm pretty guilty of bending these slightly outward. You're not really supposed to do that, but that allows you to kind of manipulate that safety easier. But with the Jack, I didn't have to do that. I could just use my index finger and, rock and roll all day long. Now, another extended feature is the magazine release. It has an extra wide paddle that makes extracting spent magazines substantially easier. Does it look a little weird? Yeah, a little bit, but it's not too bad at all. I mean, it's something you forget about pretty quickly. I mean, and if you really have your heart dead set on a standard one, it's not something that a half-talented, half-competent gunsmith couldn't do for you for a couple of bucks plus the cost of the part, which is probably like $5. Now, behind all this, you have a standard AKM polymer checkered pistol grip and a fixed wooden stock. Pretty much everything you've come to expect from like a mil-spec AK. But let's get to performance. As I mentioned earlier, the first generation of 5.56 Jack rifles, they weren't exactly tack drivers. So how did the new version fare? In a pair of words, infinitely better. I mean, I tested 5 different loads of ammo, including 55 grain steel cased Wolf, Federal M193, Winchester 62 grain M855, 55 grain ammo from Norma, and 77 grain SIG Performance match ammunition. And with the exception of the 62 grain ammo, everything grouped around 2 MOA. As for the 62 grain ammo, for whatever reason, the rifle did not love it, and it was grouping at like 2.5 MOA, but still more than combat accurate. And while all of this might not seem like anything to write home about for AR guys, 2 inches at 100 yards is excellent for an AK. Plus, I didn't just test the gun at 25 yards and extrapolate the data. I actually shot the gun at 100 yards off a Lehman bag jack on a shooting bench. And once I was happy with empirical accuracy data, I shot the gun at a friend's farm at steel silhouette targets out to 400 yards, and I never had a missed shot due to mechanical accuracy. Shooter skill? Lousy eyesight? Yeah, sure. But 9 times out of 10, steel was slammed when I pulled the trigger. As far as reliability, it was outstanding as well. I fired 650 rounds of ammo through the gun using every 5.56 AK magazine in my collection, including Bulgarian Circle 10, Polish military, Polish civilian, Serbian AC Unity standard, AK-12 style, and I even used one of the caliber conversion followers in a Bakelite magazine, and it just ran, regardless of ammunition and magazine combination. It ran and ran. It did what all of the old AKs and 5.56 should have done out of the box. Have light recoil, shoot straight, and run like a scalded dog. So, has WBP fixed the Jack? Is it worth the money? Yes, and in my opinion, yes. They're about $1,200, which is unfortunately a far cry from those original Warsaw 3s, but with Warsaw 3s now commanding not that far off from that, maybe $1,100, $1,200 themselves, I mean, this is a no-brainer. I mean, the furniture is beautiful, the finish is fine, and the sights were dead straight out of the factory. Not to mention the gun was more than combat accurate. I was capable of hitting steel silhouette, man-sized targets out to 400 yards with iron sights when my eyes would actually cooperate, although I'm getting old, as you may have noticed. The point being is, yes, this is this generation's Warsaw, but better. It's, if the Warsaw had come out and it was a polished, beautifully made product, this would be the Warsaw. It's the most affordable 5.56 AK on the market that offers a true mil-spec gun. Well, other than the giggle switch. Now, there are obviously a few areas where they kind of enhance the rifle, which is fine. After all, it's designed for civilians. And I think overall, yeah, it's a gem, man. And if you're on the fence about buying one of these, swing on by Atlantic Firearms or whoever and just, pick one up if you really want one. Because unfortunately, our economy is going to absolute hell, and so these are not going to get cheaper, and the ammo is definitely not going to get cheaper. Anyway, for Burst Review, I am Jim Grant. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for, what's that? We haven't heard it for years. What is it? More Burst Reviews. See you guys.